Good. I was just about to say that. So this meeting is being recorded. Couple of reminders, the usual. We're going to make these every meeting. Try and mute yourself if you're not talking. I just want to remind us all of the purpose. We're not here talking about, I mean, you know, the pros and cons of incorporation will pop out when they pop out. But the primary purpose of this study is looking at the boundary and the services. And so that's a precursor. So let's just try and keep ourselves focused on that if we can. Ron, I welcome comments from yourself as we go through. If you can try to keep them relatively brief, I will also provide you a recap period at the end if you want for longer presentation. But if you can keep them to just, you know, toss us a bone every once in a while, that's great. We don't need the full meal deal. So I think all that said, we're ready to go. I'll take a motion to approve the agenda first off, if I can. Okay, so I've got Kay making the motion. Can I have a second? And Phyllis seconding. Thank you. Any discussion, any additional items that can't be fitted into this agenda? Okay, Ron.
I have an update from Kurt. He still has not received the link. His email that he sent me is Kurt Hebert, KURTHIEBERT @yahoo.com. So the message is he still hasn't received anything.
Okay, we'll work to get him on board shortly. I do know he's received some of those invites because I saw him respond to one of them. We're going to keep going here.
Now. I just sent another one now. So, but it was to the same email that I'd sent it earlier. So we'll give it a shot.
Any further changes to the agenda? Going twice, 3 times. Okay, that said, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the agenda, raise your hand or say aye. Okay, any opposed? Mylene, it's difficult to see you when you don't have your screen on, but I'm going to assume you're on board for that. Okay, so that motion is carried. Minutes. Minutes were circulated in advance. Can I have a motion to accept as circulated? Got Bob and seconded by Kay. So now that we've got the motion on the floor, is there any discussion relative to the minutes? No comments, questions, errors, and omissions. Okay, great. Call the question. All those in favor of the minutes as circulated, raise your hand or say aye. Any opposed? Okay, that's good. And this is hilarious. Mylene is texting me with her little thumbs up or thumbs down. Sorry. All right, thank you, Mylene. I'm getting your texts. Okay, Bob, that motion is carried.
I want to acknowledge Eleanor's not here either.
Thank you. I knew we were missing somebody. Yeah. And actually, that's too bad. Eleanor has a ton of corporate memory, and I value the presence.
Here's Kurt.
Okay, good. Glad you could make it, Kurt. We've got the housekeeping stuff done, and we are now just going to move into the consultants are going to present the fact sheets. So the way we do this, again, just a reminder, Alan and Sherry, you can make your presentation. I'll field the questions and manage the questions, and then we'll go on to the next sheet. Okay, over to you for the first one.
Great, thanks very much, Mr. Chair. We are going to, as you can see from the agenda, from this evening's agenda, we're going to talk about bring back to the group 2 fact sheets based on discussions that have already occurred back in the December meeting. So a few changes to highlight there, and also to introduce The final Incorporations Insight paper, this one is on boundary consideration. So we'll talk about that and then move on to the discussion regarding the open house meetings. But I will pass it over to Sherry to lead the presentations on these ones. And I'll bring it on screen.
Thank you. I'll wait for the on-screen version.
Can I make a quick interruption? Hello, it's Kurt Hebert. I've got a number of my neighbors that are trying to join in on this meeting, and they are unable to join the meeting.
Well, I guess if you were to pass on the, first off, I'm really sorry about that. So let's just make that clear. Second, Kurt, you know who those are. We don't. If it's possible for you to pass on the same link that was sent to you just now, that's about the only way we can get that information to them at this stage of the game.
Okay, very good. I'll do that right now. Thank you.
Okay. Now we're going to move forward. Sherry, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Alan, if you can just move forward to, thanks. So the first one, I just wanted to touch on the two fact sheets that we brought back. One, the transit one, we made some very minor changes to this based on some information we got last meeting. So on page 2, we've made a reference to the fact that the service agreement that ties transit in Area D to transit in Area E makes it more challenging to change that agreement or make service changes. And then on page 3, based on some information, David spoke with the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. So we just added the point there in the incorporation impacts that an incorporation could be an opportunity to revisit that agreement with BC Transit. So we've just added that information based on our discussion last time. Can I proceed with the the next one, or does anyone have any comments on that change? Or again, it was a fairly
Are there any
minor
comments or
change,
questions? Nope, hearing none, carry on.
Oh, was Ron, was that a hand up? Sorry, Matt.
Ron,
if you-
Yeah,
if
Ron,
you
are you
want-
trying to ask a question? Okay.
Yeah, I was muted and a comment, and I just want to put a punctuation mark on this. It's something that's very difficult to understand the significance of this distinction. I, at the board, as the only elected area official from Area D, can do nothing. If it's a municipal, it's a game changer on transportation. We had a meeting on November 25th where this was discussed. The director from Naramata is happy with the service. Our community is very unhappy. It's a very different service. It's a very different experience. And it demonstrates how the regional district governance model just doesn't work on an example like this. And so I really appreciate the amendment to the fact sheet. It's one of those things that the average person is not going to fully understand. So I really appreciate that clarification. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ron. Go ahead, Sherry. I think that's it for questions.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. With the administration services fact sheet, basically we just added some information to the discussion about the incorporation impact. So that's at the end of the fact sheets, and that's based on some of the questions and feedback we received from the last meeting. What we added is that we touched on the size of council, the need for a municipal hall, as well as the change in some of the revenue sources that would occur under incorporation model. Really, it's consistent with what we had in our incorporation insights paper on incorporation impacts. So some of the information that was in that paper wasn't in this one. So we've just made sure that that was consistent.
Okay, any comments or questions on that? Okay, not seeing or hearing any, so
Perfect.
carry on with the next presentation.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so now we will touch on the last paper that we will be bringing forward, or in the last of this sort of series that we've been working on. And this is the Incorporation Insight paper on boundary considerations. So this paper touches on why we need a boundary before an incorporation study can proceed. Basically touches on the fact that all of the analysis that is part of an incorporation study is based on one boundary, and that we need that definitive boundary to figure out the tax base. And it's an important tool for determining the cost of the tax and the tax implications for comparison purposes. So there are all the issues that we've talked about, like local control and control over services and governance changes, but then there's the cost impacts, and really you need that boundary to talk about both those things, but it really is significant for being able to calculate what those cost implications are. And that's an important part of the equation for a lot of people. We also noted in here that really having one boundary really helps to be clear with the residents. You know, the nuances and changes of an incorporation are difficult enough to understand and appreciate, that it's really easiest if you can be clear about what you're presenting, and having only one scenario for change for residents to try and figure out is really the main objective. The second thing we touch on here is, how is a boundary established? So we look at three things. We look at the data that goes into it, community input, and then some of the criteria that are established for the analysis part. The data refers to sort of all the various sources that we look at. A lot of it is planning related. So we look at things like regional growth strategies, OCP plans, zoning, settlement patterns, ALR. So a lot of those are that mapping and information about different planning and land use designations. We also look at population and population density. So some of that is census information that that provides us. We look at service areas, service maps, just as we've been sharing as we go through the fact sheet. So the service areas that apply to the various services. We also look at BC assessment data. So BC assessment data gives us things like property classes. So all properties are divided into 9 different property classes for assessment purposes. And we also look at property values. And all of those sort of data points go into figuring out what the boundaries might be. The second part of it is looking at community input, and that's something that we're hoping to gather through our open houses as one avenue for that. But through the open houses and feedback forms that we will have as part of that, we can begin to identify some of the concerns that residents in different communities might have, or governance issues that they might have. We can figure out where there are concerns that might suggest a need for a change in governance structure, or where people maybe don't want to see any changes at all and are happy with the services and service levels and governance that they receive already. We might find out that there are different areas that have different service needs. And the purpose of the community input isn't just that people should have to decide whether they want to be in or out or incorporate at this point, but really more to get a flavor of what their satisfaction is with the services and the structure and their communities right now. So it's just a snapshot really of what the current state is and what concerns that they might have. And we can sort of draw conclusions from that after understanding where communities are at right now. And then the last part of this process is combining really that data and that community input and using it to analyze and create criteria for determining a municipal boundary. So factors that would, we want to look at factors that would assure the province, for instance, that creating a municipality is a good idea and is a sustainable model and solution for the community. And some of the other factors are more about the existing area and keeping communities and communities of interest together and not splitting areas between 2 different jurisdictions. So I'll go through the list of criteria that we've compiled in a second, but the last point in the paper is, can the boundary change once we've established it? So once the boundary is approved, and by approved, I mean it goes through this process where a committee is usually recommending it, and then it would be endorsed by the regional district, and then also reviewed and approved by the ministry. So once it's gone through that process, that is the boundary that's generally used for any incorporation study that proceeds from that. So that is used for making all those tax implications that I talked about earlier, and it will be the boundary that's used for the referendum process if the incorporation study gets to that part. Once the incorporation goes through, and if it was approved and a municipality is created, David will probably attest to the fact that changing that boundary once it's established is not uncommon. There are often little properties that get added. I've been more involved with properties being added to a municipality than removed, but occasionally they are removed as well. So there is a process in place to adjust boundaries over time without sort of this whole entire creation process. It's like a miniature version of this type of process. So there are, it's not like it's a boundary and that's what it's going to be forever and ever. So there is a process where you can adjust it, but once it's set for the incorporation study, it is usually set for that, and that is the boundary that's then used for the referendum process to create the incorporation. I'm just going to pause there and give it back to you, Matt. I'm going to go through the factors and criteria, but I just wanted to see if anyone has any questions on the first part of the first 3 pages, I guess, of the sheet.
Okay, we'll take questions and maybe voice them right from the outset, because if you just raise your hand, it's hard for me to see it in the viewing mode we're in right now. So do I have any questions at this point?
Hello.
Yes, Phyllis, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, with being that we're now entering into our third year of this pandemic, and how, some things have definitely changed. I mean, I think about the recreation, that's changed. I think about, the length of time that a person waits for an inspection or that sort of thing on property. I'm wondering, if we're just looking at trying to get a flavor of how happy people are with what the services have been for the last 2 years, is it not really going to be tainted by, this whole COVID that we've all experienced in the last couple of years? And how do we factor that in?
Okay, Alan.
Sorry about that. They said to find out where I was there. Thank you for the question. Yes, and I think that it's a good question. You're right. We may find, because everybody's a little grumpy these days with pandemic, which is I certainly am. I'm sure some of you are as well. But we may find that the satisfaction level that we might normally see in a typical year isn't there, and that's to be expected, perhaps. That said, when we go through a little bit later and talk about kind of the process going forward, one of the things that we'll hear about is that what we are going to go, and as part of our open houses, we will kind of talk with folks and so forth and kind of get a sense as to some of the concerns and some of the issues. We'll also later on in the process, once we kind of take the technical information and bring that together with some of the feedback we get and put together a couple of optional boundaries, and then we will then put those out to the neighborhoods, to the community in the form of a survey, in the form of information that they can absorb and then react to. And I think that kind of satisfaction issues aside, once people kind of see where their place is proposed to be fitting with respect to any particular boundary, we will kind of get additional input there on whether that accords with their perspectives on how they can best be serviced and governed in a local government versus incorporation, or in the context of incorporation. The other thing too is that when we do meet with folks in this upcoming set of meetings, we will hear some dissatisfaction, I'm sure, because of the reasons that Phyllis mentioned, the pandemic and so forth. I think that we'll also be able, and I'm just letting some other folks in here. And I think we'll also, however, be able to infer from some of the input we get, whether the issues that we are hearing and the concerns that we are hearing are a function of the incorporation status or are a function of something else. And in other words, would incorporation kind of solve or resolve the issues that are being raised, resolve the concerns that are being raised, or do the concerns have remedies within an existing form of governance in a particular neighborhood? So it's one of the things that I've kind of said in the past is that these boundary type of discussions, they tend to be kind of first and foremost, the boundary exercises tend to be first and foremost technical exercises informed by community input. And the fact that we'll have a few kicks at the can in getting that community input as it relates specifically to boundary is going to be important. And also our ability to kind of parse a little bit and kind of consider carefully the information we do get at this upcoming round will also be helpful.
Might also be worth a separate question on the survey. Do you see these, if you have concerns, do you see these worsened in the recent past as a result of COVID?
That's, yeah, to kind of put some context in there, that's not a bad idea.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking not so much that people are cranky because it's COVID, but I'm thinking that, you know, like there's
Legitimate.
there's less inspectors to cover the area because people are sick or they can't get in because the protocols are tighter, that sort of thing. So, you know, and then with the recreation facilities being closed down because people can't be in the swimming pool or people can't be in the gym or whatever. So it's not just that people are cranky, it's that, you know, we're not allowed to use some of those facilities or have some of those services because it, you know, it's been governed by our health restrictions.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not just that people are cranky, just that's what I want to.
Yeah. No, good points.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions?
Looks like Kay's got a question.
Okay, Kate, thank you.
Would it involve a great deal more work when you're doing the survey to ask for each of the levels, you know, like to what degree do you think this service functions as it is? And that would be the first question, however you would word it. And then the second question could be with respect to that particular service. Has this changed since the onset of COVID? And so then you would, for each area, you may get a clearer reading of whether or not they've been dissatisfied pre-COVID or it's an ongoing, you know, it's an issue that's arisen as a result of COVID.
Mm-hmm. Very good question. I think that is a great idea to allow some kind of, you know, temporal or longitudinal kind of assessment in that sense. Is it changed over time? Another thing too, which maybe just picking up on Kate's point there, another question and this is maybe something posed in discussion at the open houses, although perhaps it could find its way into a survey as well, is trying to get to at kind of the relative change, or the changes relative to those in adjacent jurisdictions. So for example, Phyllis talked about building inspection. So yes, while it's true that RDOS is, and I don't know this for a fact, but let's just kind of assume for the moment that RDOS is short-staffed in its building inspection, and it is less able than it was pre-pandemic to be as responsive as it would like to be in doing building inspections and providing building permits. We know, and we can kind of speak to this in our discussions with folks, that while that may be the case in RDOS, that is also certainly the case in Penticton and Osoyoos and Oliver.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so it is, that can help us to kind of provide people information to help them kind of understand that it's all relative, and also to perhaps allow the committee then to take the input and adjudicate on that input, or kind of judge that input, you know, in that context.
Okay. clearly COVID will need to be factored into people's survey responses. So I think we got that point. Okay, any other comments? If not, Sherry, I'm gonna get you to do what you said you were going to do, which is dig further into several of these factors.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'll just take you through figure 1, which is just the table of some of the boundary considerations or the criteria that are used to establish really any municipal boundary. So these aren't specific just to Area D. We started out by mentioning, and they aren't mentioned, I will add in any particular order, future growth and development. Again, we need to ensure that a municipality encompasses growth areas and includes also have areas left to grow. You don't want to constrain a municipality by only including the areas that are already built up, but you want to leave them some areas still to develop. But at the same time, you want to consider efficiency of service delivery. So you want it compact enough that it makes it easier to deliver some services to the entire municipality. And make it cost efficient to do so. We mentioned property assessment earlier. So property assessment class, you want a diversity in property assessment, or that's that's a good aim. It's nice to have a mix of commercial, industrial, and residential. And we generally seek to minimize farm properties. So that's class 9 in the property classes, because when they are included in a municipality, there's some tax exemptions that they lose by doing so. So we try to minimize the impacts on farm properties. But other than that, yeah, it's more beneficial to have a range of property classes, and again, to have a bit of a commercial, industrial base and industrial base, if possible, to spread out your tax burden. ALR, again, this relates to the property assessment class, but not all ALR land is assessed as farm class. But so there is no need to expressly exclude ALR properties from a municipal boundary, but they're generally not intended as growth areas. So you don't usually go out of your way to try and include farm properties. But again, if they are captured within logical boundaries or servicing boundaries, they are often included. Yeah, we try and minimize that generally. Services, so local government services and service boundaries, in particular, water and sewer. So hard infrastructure services, generally you include all of the service area when it pertains to sewer or water. It's very difficult if you cut a service area and split it between 2 jurisdictions, particularly when different jurisdictions would have control over the land use that applies there. So wherever you have usually water or sewer service areas, you include them all within a boundary. Fire service, again, this is less of an issue than it is for services like water and sewer. But generally, when you're making a municipal boundary, you like to consider whether you are creating a municipality that has consistent service. So are you able to provide fire service given the current service levels and placement of fire halls to the entire municipality, or are you going to have different service levels within your municipality? Are you splitting that fire service up? So are you now having to consider addressing fire service in areas beyond the municipal boundary? These are all things that go into that are considered. Roads are and road maintenance are one of the largest costs and expenses for a new municipality, or for any municipality actually. So in general, the more you can limit the road length, the more you can minimize those costs. So yeah, so road length and is definitely a consideration when you're looking at boundaries. You don't want to, the highways aren't a cost for the municipality, but all the local roads will be. So yeah, that's just a consideration that goes into that. Tax base. tax base, we touched on this earlier. So not only is it about the mix of property classes that you'd like to include in a municipal boundary, but you also want to make sure that there's sufficient tax base so that the community is able to afford its services. So that's based on the mix of property types as well, but also having sufficient value there. Parcel and natural physical boundaries. So that speaks to really communities of interest. Sometimes you have things like a park or even a lake or something that's a natural boundary, and that can often reinforce a sense of community or delineate between two different areas. And sometimes those are good to either use as one end of the municipality or one boundary, and something to consider. Population, you need to have sufficient population. We have several really small municipalities within BC. Some of them were created historically, and I don't know that they would be created if we went through this process for them today. You need to have sufficient people, not just for things like sharing costs, but even having enough people to support some of the local services. So if you think of things like volunteer fire departments, or even having enough people to volunteer for being or running for council. We do actually have, I've worked for small improvement districts before where, you know, they can't even find enough people to run for the board or the commission or whatever it is that is running the service. And so municipalities having sufficient population to support the services, to support those roles is a key consideration. So, you know, when you have areas, I can think of a few municipalities that when they've lost their major industry and their population dwindles, that becomes a real challenge for them. And the last one, again, we've touched on this a bit already, but the idea that community input is really one of the main considerations. And you want to use that community input to make sure we aren't splitting areas where people identify. We want municipalities where people identify with that sense of place. They have something in common with the other people in their municipality. They have that sense of community. And those kind of things help to make a municipality a resilient place, and a place that, yeah, when people take an interest and identify with their community, then it helps the municipality out. So those are a few of the things that go into the consideration. And again, these are sort of more generic. They're not intended to specifically relate to Area D, but they are some of the criteria that we look at when we're creating incorporation boundaries. I'll pass it back to you, Matt.
Okay, any questions, anybody? First off, I really appreciated this sort of run through of the different factors that are taken into consideration. So first off, any questions from any of the members? Yeah, Phyllis?
I have a question, and I just actually, it's more of a, if I could just get a little bit more information or clarification, the tax base criterion. And I understand the mix of property classes, but then your other point there was the sufficient tax base or value. And I'm just wondering, like, could you give me an example of you know, a mix, you know, that is currently, you know, can you give me an example?
Well, there's I guess a couple different things. I mean, one has to do more with, again, the mix. So the more you're relying on your residential tax base, so then if your municipality has some road or bridge wipeout, or, you know, some major cost center, and the burden of that is primarily on each resident, right? And so it's nice to have a balance of property classes, because each property class pays a different rate of taxes, and it just helps to diversify that tax base, so it's not a hit on every resident that's already there. So there's just sort of a mix of things going into there. So if some businesses are doing well, it can maybe support that, and it's not all falling on the residents. So the higher the mix of classes, if it's 95% of it is residential tax base, that's always going to fall on the residents to be able to raise the funds for whatever the municipality would like to do for those services. So spreading it out is a good idea, because municipalities do have the ability to adjust their tax rates for the type of property class. In terms of value, again, the larger the municipality's tax base, the more spread out any individual cost is going to be. So when you do have something large that you're working towards, or some road improvements, or a new sewage treatment plant, or whatever it is, the more you can spread that cost amongst properties of value, then the easier it is to just the larger the tax base that you can spread out those costs, right? If you have a $5 million hit, spreading it out amongst properties that are valued higher is a little easier than if you have the lower the tax base, then the bigger that burden will seem. That's all that's intended to refer to. Alan, have you got any?
Sure. Yeah, maybe I could just add to Sherry's comments, all of which were bang on, but just in terms of the first question with respect to the or the first element that Sherry looked at with respect to the mix of tax classes, so kind of the diversity of the tax base. There are, if we look around the area, and I don't have all the data in front of me, I'm going by memory, but I do know from, and Jim can maybe corroborate this, I hope, or correct it, but when West Kelowna was created as a municipality, it had a 93% residential tax base, 7% non-residential. Kelowna at the time, oh yeah, go ahead, Jim.
You're right about that, and
Okay.
I just did a check right now as the Area D stands. It's 88%.
Okay, so so you're in good. You're in very good shape, because I was going to say that Kelowna is about 85% residential. The Sorrento Blind Bay in Columbia Shuswap, which is now, which on April 30th, very well could be going to referendum on a corporation. It has a 97% residential. So in general, the lower the residential and the more other classes, it's generally better. So from an affordability perspective, the other thing in terms of the overall size of the tax base, I was going to say is that when we think about it, property is a way to store wealth. And so the value of the property is kind of an indication to some degree of the broader community's ability to pay for things, to afford things. So as Sherry quite rightly said, the larger that is, the more resilient that community will be. So we want to make sure when we're setting a boundary that we take into account the overall size, not just the diversity, but the overall size of the tax base, so that there's some built-in resiliency in whatever in any municipality that may emerge from that.
So does that mean, like, if we have, the wineries, the vineyards and the wineries, that, they're included within our part of our, they would have I would think of, a significant value, and they would contribute to our tax base, as well as the UEEs, the United Electrical business that's in Okanagan Falls. And then like if you have a structure lamb or any kind of a builder, they would contribute significantly, and that's a nice diverse mix of tax base. Then is that?
Yeah, that's certainly the idea. Yes, that's very much the idea. And I know Jim's got his hand up there in a second. So, but I was going to say that it's particularly helpful in a municipality, because unlike an electoral area, in a municipality, council has the authority to set the tax rates for each class of property. In an electoral area, the difference between the class rate categories, or kind of is determined by the provincial government through regulation. But in a municipality, it's the council that chooses what it's going to set each rate at for the different classes. So it does give the council the ability to, and of course, there's always going to be a public process and there'll be checks and balances, but it gives council the ability, the more diverse your tax base, to shift a portion of the burden from one class to another. So you're absolutely right, Phyllis. The more you kind of get of those, and you gave some good examples of some commercial enterprises that you would be able to kind of help to use those to help shoulder the burden. And Jim, I think, and I'm sorry, Matt, I know Jim was going to speak on that too.
Carry on, Jim.
I was just going to say the exact same thing. Municipalities usually increase the tax burden 1.5 to two times more than the residential burden. Right now, as Alan stated, the multiplier is set by the province, and for business and light industry, it's 3.4, which the advantage is on the municipality side because they can make the burden a little bit less than what the regional districts can do. So it would attract more business to a municipality rather than the regional district because they know that taxes could be lower.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay. So I've got a question then, Alan or Sherry. You know, if we take the idea that we're going as some kind of a municipal district, and just say we were including down to the southern boundary of our current area, like, does that mean, like, would you include the raw land, crown land? I mean, do you include that as well, and if not, who gets that?
In general, where it's kind of contiguous, or where you would, if you had kind of crown land, say along Highway 97 around Vaso Lake, kind of down to the border and stuff, yeah, you would likely include that. If you have crown land that is on what could become kind of the border, so it's contiguous to an ultimate border, then you could exclude that. One of the things that we did in the Columbia Shoe Swap example was to say where there are resource lands, much of which was crown, we recommended in the CSRD, and ultimately the province accepted, that those lands not be included, because having those in there, we felt would leave any municipality liable to have to, or responsible for having to take more of a direct role in forest fires that could occur on that crown land. So it really depends on the specifics at play at any particular time. But if you had kind of crown land between two populated areas and you wanted both populated areas within a boundary, you would take in that crown land.
Okay, and next, just to the winery example, are wineries typically counted in, or I can see why you'd count them out for being agricultural land reserve, class 9 maybe, but they're high value, high revenue.
For sure. And if we look at Jim's example too, or his former kind of watering hole up there in I shouldn't say watering hole, that's a terrible thing with the context of wineries, but you know what I mean. his former place of work up there in West Kelowna. Yes, they have a tremendous number of wineries in there, as does Kelowna, as does Oliver, of course, too. So while you do have agricultural land and you do have, in some cases, that kind of class 9 farmland, you also have big commercial enterprises associated with those wineries that you would be quite happy to have within your jurisdiction.
All right, thanks. Any other questions?
I see Ron has his hand up. I didn't know if you saw
Ron.
that, Matt. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
No,
thank
it's really
you.
hard to keep track of everybody.
Yeah.
Sorry, so don't hesitate to just speak up. Ron?
Yes, thank you so much. I have both a comment and a question. The comment is just an add-on with respect to Phyllis's question and the comments already provided by Sherry and Alan. And I just wanted to add that diversity and balance are real important. And in our area, we are blessed with incredible diversity. We have, industrial, commercial, residential, which gives us balance. And we have within the residential, we have a broad range from lower priced affordable housing all the way to some of the most beautiful estate and waterfront residential housing in the region. And that gives a lot of strength because for those of you who don't know, some of our higher end residential properties pay incredible property taxes, and the cost of the services don't vary. The garbage pickup's the same on a very low cost versus, so that diversity within that one category is real important, and we have a blessing. Another blessing we have is we have the largest inventory of currently undeveloped industrial zone land in the entire Okanagan, but for the First Nation lands. This is a big deal. It's a big deal, and it's important, and it's real important in the context of incorporation review. And that, you know, you look at places that have industry, that have commercial. We've heard already the places that have that balance. You know, we're 88%. I think you know, you compare to 85 for Kelowna, and then, you know, 97 for Sorrento Blind Bay, you can certainly see our balance is much healthier, much stronger, much better. My question, which relates to Matt's comment and ties in to some of what we've discussed about diversity and balance, and I'm hoping the consultants can help with some clarification on my question, which is the classification of municipalities. There's you know, generally understood to be 4, but there's more than 4. The 4 are village and town and district and city, but there's also specialized municipalities like Sun Peaks, a mountain resort, and resource-based or island-based. I think that's a real important, I haven't heard it yet, maybe I missed it, but I think I know when I got elected, I didn't know this. And when I went to conferences and spoke to others across the province, and indeed, it was Director Doug Holmes, a council member of Summerland, who at the SILGA conference in 2019 recommended to me that you really want to look at municipal district, just like they have in Summerland. If you think of Summerland, and the strength they have, it's a wonderful municipality. You look at, they have an electric utility, they have panels on their arts and cultural building that contribute to their electric grid, but they have the diversity of those wineries that we heard a moment ago, and commercial and residential and agriculture. Agriculture is also important. So when you look at the choices, the classification choices, what I've learned listening to people talk, even today, I took calls of people complaining about this town and what this town should do. And they don't even understand we're not a municipality and we can't do the kind of things that they're expecting because they already think it's a town, a type of municipality when it isn't. But I think what's real important, and this is going to be a tough one for most folks, what are the distinctions? What is possible? I know that I have a real interest in the municipal district model like Summerland. And I think that's important for the committee members to understand what those differences are. Thanks.
Okay, so, and maybe whether this is a question to David or Sherry and Alan, but can you just give us a high level overview of the differences between the different forms of incorporation?
I'd be happy to, and I'm happy to have David chime in as well. I don't want to kind of usurp the role here, but I'm happy to. Yes, high level. So there used to be some bigger differences when it comes to districts than others, but let me just kind of say there are, when we look at corporations, so municipal corporations, there are, as Ron mentioned, there are kind of 6 that come to mind. There's the city, the town, the village, the district, island municipalities, which are unique to the island trust area and only to that area. And so that is only on the coast. And then we have resort municipalities, and resort municipalities are, I think at last count, there were 13 in the province. They have special authorities when it comes to revenue sources and taxation. They also are under certain constraints in the sense that, for example, they have to have their OCPs reviewed by and approved by the province. But they do have some special authorities. I know Sun Peaks is one, Whistler, of course, is a big one. Fernie, I believe, is one, Golden and so forth, but I don't believe, or Revelstoke is, I don't believe there are any in the South Okanagan. Anyway, that is a different process that you would go through. Likely after you became incorporated, you could then apply to become a resort municipality. If you had kind of a very strong tourism presence, that tends to be kind of the driving factor there. When we look though at the other four, which are standard across the province, that is the city, the village, the town, and the district, there really is very little difference among those. The municipal act, or the community charter, I beg your pardon, does kind of set out some guidance in the sense that, and it does guide the province in saying that the province will label something a city if it's over a certain population, a town if it's between certain populations, and then a village if it's smaller. A village does have more constraints on it in the sense that all of its bylaws have to be approved by the minister. But other than that, they're all corporations with the same legal authorities. The district is this also has all those legal authorities too. It is different than a village in that it doesn't have to have its bylaws reviewed, and that's a good thing. It is the only two real differences that relate to a district. One is that they have certain drainage powers that other municipalities don't have. So you see some districts that make use of those. But the other is that a district has to have a minimum of a 7-member council as opposed to a 4-member council that you could have a town and a village. So places sometimes will take it to have a 7-member council, mayor and 6 councilors. But other than that, there's not a lot of difference between a district and the other things. Districts used to be, less so today, but used to be also identified based on their geographic size. So you had very large areas that were referred to as district municipalities. That's not necessarily a hard and fast any longer. It could be used as a guidance, but it's not necessarily it's not a firm rule on that.
Okay, thanks, Alan. And David, I'll move to you to fill in on that. And you may want to just, if you've got them top of mind, give us the sort of minimum population numbers that might be required for some of these, because my sense is we're kind of slotted towards one particular option.
Yep. Thank you. So Alan, thank you. That was a great overall explanation of the differences. There's one more kind of unique kind of local government, and that's up in the north, the Northern Rockies Regional Municipality, which is like a combination of a regional district and a municipality, because the one area, the one community is really the only area that has a substantial population. So that's a special change to give them some additional powers. That's another unique circumstance. Yeah, it used to be historically in the past, if a municipality was incorporated as a district or a village, they would have either some further constraints or some additional powers. Now it's usually just the same regardless. Excuse me, to your specific question, Matt, if you look at the Local Government Act, Section 10, that is classification of municipalities, and so it goes by population. So basically, a municipality must be incorporated as a village if the population is less than 2,500, as a town if the population is greater than 2,500 but less than 5,000, and I believe that's where almost any kind of possible boundary configuration for Area D would land. And then as a city if the population is greater than 5,000. And that's set in letters patent upon first incorporation, but later on, as Alan mentioned, council can, if they wish, apply for essentially a classification or a name change, usually when the population grows, and usually it's a town that they feel to become a city. Excuse me, the most recent example would be Mission, which went from the district of Mission, and now it's the city of Mission. So sorry, that was Local Government Act, Section 10, and Okanagan Falls or Area D would likely be incorporated as a town, just by default. That's not to say that there's opportunity for other, but it's just as default according to the LGA. I think that was all that I wanted to share on that.
And then the alternative would be a municipal district. Is that right?
There is no such thing really as a municipal district anymore. It would just be called a district of
District.
whatever the name would be.
Okay.
Yeah, and then resort municipalities is a different kind of designation that's as Alan mentioned, upon incorporation, or if a municipality thinks they have a substantial either tourism base, or it used to be based upon beds, the number of bed spaces that were in your town. It's a tax incentive program that you can apply to, but it's not through our ministry. But if successful, they do receive the designation of a resort municipality, and they have access to some further funding programs.
Okay. Why I'm asking these questions is because I do think they're going to sort of impact us as we go into this next chapter in terms of where we draw the line. Are there also not some restrictions on like 25, a town being 25 to 5,000 people within X number of square kilometers or something like that?
That's where the district formula would kind of come into effect,
And-
yes, depending on the size of it, yeah. And
I
that
guess
is,
having done my own sort of kitchen table math,
Yep.
my sense is we may only have really one option, being a district or a
Well,
village.
So
Yeah.
in section 10, in 10(1)D, there's a lovely, because there's always exceptions, despite paragraphs A to C as a district municipality. So your name would not be called that, but that's what your classification would be. If the area to be incorporated is greater than 800 hectares and has an average population density of less than 5 persons per acre. So you can look at that and you can kind of see for yourself what it might be. But yes.
All right.
And that's probably what Ron was also referring to in terms
Yeah.
of like the size of the area. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I think that would maybe be helpful as we move forward to just sort of narrow down which of these options we're likely looking at.
Matt, if I may just add, just on that very point you've just mentioned, Sherry and I put together a paper for the Sorrento Blind Bay process that we could certainly, it may be of use to kind of repurpose for this committee, because the information would be identical, and it just speaks to some of the distinctions among these different types and kind of the reasons the committee may feel strongly about one versus the other. And in that particular case, because as David said, there's always exceptions and so forth. And another exception is in a related section where it gives cabinet the authority to if it feels it's in the public interest to do so, to put a particular place into a different category. And in the Sorrento Blind Bay example, the ministry came to the committee, your committee in the Sorrento Blind Bay context, and asked for some input on that point. And so that's prompted the paper that we could easily repurpose to meet maybe the needs you're talking about, Matt.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful. Ron.
Yes, thank you, Matt. And I agree that would be helpful. I have a further follow-up question, and I'm hoping what I would hope we could get is a map of the existing Area D. I don't think many of us have looked. I know I sure didn't look at it closely for most of my lifetime. But if you look at the Area D map, it's fascinating because we have Upper Carmi, which is curiously, there's not a good nexus to OK Falls. But if you look at the map, Area D is a very big area. And the vast majority is empty crown land. I mean, there's no roads, there's nothing. There's I think Alan alluded to forest fires. We've had a lot of forest fires on those lands. So I think it may be helpful to the committee and to this process if that map could be provided in future materials in a size that would have some ability to reference populations and zoning and development, because I think we have an awful lot of empty land and we have some very interesting density issues. Upper Carmi is 10-acre holdings. It's not that dense. It's interesting, about 140 some properties. Then you look at a place like Vassal Lake, very unique. You look at that corridor on 97, But once you get east of McLean Creek Road, the majority of the area is pretty empty. So I think that's, you know, if you're doing a boundary consideration, it might be nice to look at some maps. Thanks.
Okay, I think maybe we've beat that to death. I've got a question from Eleanor. Eleanor, are you able to get online and make it yourself? Hello, Eleanor. Yep, there you go.
Oh, there we are. Yeah, sorry, I seem to have an awful lot of trouble with the technology. Before on my other computer, I could see you and but not hear you. And anyway, I finally figured out. I don't know how I did it, but my question is, I admit focused on Okanagan Falls in particular, and what I was asking was how dependent on the participation, interest, connectedness of the outlying areas, how much influence does their inclusion or exclusion direct what Okanagan Falls can do? And I think you've answered quite a bit of it. Seems to be population-based and or land-based and industry, but also all that, as Ron pointed out, all that empty territory. And I think before, oh God, I hate to date myself this way, but way back, I think what they considered as their boundary option was the fire protection district. And I'm sorry, I've totally forgotten what all that included now. But what I would like to know is how dependent Okanagan Falls as this community is on the agreement or inclusion of other areas. Thank you.
So, Alan, you want to?
Sure, I can give it a shot. It's a very good question, and I think that the answer is there's probably a few answers. One is that there will be, when the boundary is being put together, the committee will want to, as Sherry pointed out in her presentation and in her paper, will want to give thought to a number of different considerations, to a number of different criteria and factors. And so some of those factors we talked about were related to assessment base, so the diversity, the overall size, some related to population and population density, and some related to kind of land use and growth and all that. So from a purely technical perspective, the committee will want to look at a boundary, and the consultants will help guide this process, but we'll want to look at a boundary that balances all those criteria and comes up with something that is viable as a municipality, that is positioned to succeed should the community wish to proceed. One part as well, so the first answer to the question that Eleanor has posed is that in looking at all of those outlying areas, the committee will want to kind of get a sense as to what the needs are there, what the population is, what the growth potential is, and the land use. Is it all farmland? Those kinds of things. So some of those may, for those reasons, be excluded. Some may be included. The committee then, and Sherry talked about this in her presentation, will also want to take into account then the input that those folks in those areas have. If it's clear from discussions and meetings with those neighborhoods that they are really not interested in being part of a municipality, and that may be something that is spelled out very clearly to the committee. That was certainly the case in the South Shuswap electoral area in Columbia Shuswap. Then that will help answer that question, and it'll make Okanagan Falls less dependent, or in fact not dependent at all, on the views of the others. If they are, if those areas conversely are quite interested in being involved, then that's something for the community to think of, and then that would tie Okanagan Falls to those areas more closely, and there would be more of an interdependence between those two areas or among the various areas. So I think we will. Are they dependent? They're dependent to the extent that it makes sense from a technical perspective to bring them into a boundary. They're dependent on to the extent that people in those outlying areas really do want to be involved in some kind of boundary. But if there's not an interest to be involved and there's not really a good technical argument to have those areas involved, then Okanagan Falls would not be dependent.
Can I just ask a related question? If,
Yeah, of course, yeah.
and let's set aside Upper Carmite, but if Heritage Hills and Vassal Lake and Okanagan Falls all wanted to move ahead, I'm just looking at the geographic, the footprint there, and I think we'd be driven towards a district. And if those two areas were not interested, we'd probably be driven towards a village. So, and I guess this is the kind of information that I think would help
So
as we move forward, you know.
I see. Yes, it's a very good point, Matt. And I think that, and I'm assuming you're referring in particular. Are you? Oh, well, I shouldn't assume. Are you referring in particular to the population level of those different areas, either together or separated?
Well, I think the population would take us up, but it's not within the sort of geographic footprint that's permitted, I think, for a town.
Okay.
And so then you'd be forced into a district.
Right. Gotcha. I
But
see
you
what you're
could
saying.
still, but to Eleanor's point, if those groups didn't want to go ahead, that wouldn't necessarily stop Okanagan Falls from going ahead.
Mhm.
We could still incorporate, but in that case, it probably wouldn't be a district. As a district, it would be as a village. And
It could be as a village. It could be. I don't know whatever that population were. If it were below 2,500, then kind of the village would be the default. But again, I would anticipate the ministry, in the same way they've done in other studies, would want to get input from the committee on how to classify that, because cabinet would set that classification in as it passed letters patent or supplementary letters patent, and so that's cabinet. If there were a compelling reason to classify it in some other way, that would be the point at which to bring those arguments forward, so the committee would get a sense there. So in other words, and I'm being presumptuous here, but if there were an aversion to being referred to as a village, for example, those arguments could be made.
okay.
And
David,
sorry,
anything you want to pile on for there?
I just wanted to jump in there and just say it would be worthwhile to have a conversation with the province, because one of the pieces of the conversation would be, even if it's just Okanagan Falls of that area, and it just happens to go, a little under 2,500. Well, what are the growth opportunities in Okanagan Falls? What are the projected population patterns? And if in the next couple of years it's going to go over that, well, at that point the province would be like, okay, well, to save everyone time for that request of a name change, let's just make it a town now, based upon projections and the data we have. So again, a lot of this conversation was based upon the data that we start to uncover and talk about.
Okay, all right. I've got everything I needed out of that. Eleanor, are you satisfied with what you heard?
Yes,
Okay,
thank you very much. I appreciate that. And while I'm shooting my mouth off, I would like to comment on how you obtain your community input in Okanagan Falls. People are a little touchy about how they're approached, and I guess that happens everywhere, but maybe I can speak with Matt and Ron about that afterwards, in terms of how to include people and how to explain the viewpoint of one particular community group, for example, business people, let us say, picking at random, to the young people. And I mean, as in high school age, or to the church groups, or to, I think sometimes we get a little bit too much tunnel vision on who we ask input from. And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be critical. It's
Okay.
just an observation and a cautionary note. Been around here a long time. Thank you.
okay. No, that's, we want you to speak up. Those are lessons of experience. We want to hear them. Let's park that for later when we're talking about community engagement.
Yes,
Any
thank
other
you.
any other comments or questions? We do have a couple more things we got to get through here. and we've got some members of the public to give some airtime to as well. So maybe I'll get Sherry to move on to the next item, which was just to highlight the materials that have been prepared for sending out. I think just the ad and stuff like that. Is that right, Sherry? Before we start talking about open houses?
Yeah, well, we just included those in the package as we normally do, the SCAHA Matters ad that went out. We included a copy of that, but we have also sent out our overview that was prepared just at the end of December, beginning of January. So that has gone out. I was hoping that Christy would be here to confirm.
So do we know if it's actually gone out or it's supposed to go out momentarily?
I thought that it was going out last Friday,
Okay.
but I haven't spoken with Christy since. So if there were issues with that being sent out, then I haven't heard about them.
Okay. So what the point out of that is that that 4-pager should be landed on, I think it's every mailbox, every postal address in Area D. If it hasn't gone out now, it's going to be going out very shortly. And thanks to Kay and a number of others who provided some input to that.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. So does that cover that? And then we're on to open houses. Is that right, Sherry?
Yep,
Okay.
that's all we had.
Lead on.
Actually, sorry, I was just gonna one more. We do want to, and we have referred to them in the overview, the mail out. We will be posting the rest of the fact sheets and if and Incorporation insights. So I was just hoping, I know before we gave everyone sort of that last heads up, if you had any other changes, we now would be the time to bring them forward. Yeah, because we will be posting them as final versions for everyone to be able to review. Some of them are already up there, but I just wanted to give everyone notice that we are posting those. So if there were any changes or second thoughts that you had on these last sheets, please let me know.
So if I recall correctly, the way we've been working this is if we present a paper at a particular meeting and there's no further feedback to it, we finalize it that week and we get it posted sort of that week or the next.
Yeah, so this would be the last.
And this will be going up PDQ.
Yeah.
Okay, not seeing any comments there. Let's move on. Open houses.
Open houses. So we have dates for our open houses. Right now they're scheduled the February 16th, 17th, 23rd, 24th. All of those are evening meetings at 7 p.m. and then one on February 26th at 1 p.m. We do have the Okanagan Falls Elementary School gym tentatively booked for all of those times. We were hoping to chat about Upper Carmi. I know we just have listed that as the venue to be determined because just appreciating the fact that that community is maybe closer to Penticton or another venue than coming all the way down to Okanagan Falls. But other than that, we have the elementary school gym booked for those dates. And right now, based on current restrictions, we're planning for events that can be attended both in person as well as online, so hybrid events. I think there's already been a few options or a few of these held already with the smart screen, and they seem to go quite well. But yes, we will have to continue to evolve with the COVID restrictions or any changes in restrictions. And we have a few sort of plan B options, and we need to kind of think about that and revisit as any changes come.
So any comments or questions on that? I think it was the 16th was East Side Road focus. and Skaha Estates. 17th, Upper Carmi. 23rd was East Side Road North, Highland Hill, Highlands, Lakeshore Highlands and Heritage Hills, etc. 24th was Vaso Lake and Sun Valley. And the 28th, Saturday afternoon, sorry, 26th, Saturday afternoon was Okanagan Falls. Kurt, is I think you'd indicated a preference to use an Upper Carmi location. I don't think there's any issues with that. If there is one, other than getting agreement with RDOS. So whether, I think you'll have to hammer out, and we'll have to set something up so that you can do that, to decide where that one's going to be. Otherwise, you know, we've got the date set as discussed with you, and the time, etc.
Can you speak
Go
to
ahead,
the,
Kurt.
Yeah, I offered my residents, I have enough room here to probably host 40 or 50 people if I need to. But if there's a public facility that's more in line with COVID restrictions or what have you, I guess we'd be open to that too. I'm not sure how, we try not to make it too far from Upper Carmi. I mean, I guess OK Falls is a 20-minute drive from here, so just keep that in consideration.
Yeah, and that's where I was thinking, if there's limitations as a result of COVID, yeah, I'm sure there'd be an opportunity to meet in Penticton in the RDOS facility or something along those lines. And that would be probably closer than Okanagan Falls for your people.
It certainly would, yep.
Yeah, okay, good. All right, we're all on track there. We'll get that sorted out over the next few weeks. Phyllis.
yeah, can you just speak briefly to the format of the meetings and how we're going to encourage people to bring their questions or concerns forward at the meetings?
Well, I'll take a run at that. We're going to use the smart board that our area director got for us. And we have used it once. Alan presented at a meeting there to provide the community with an overview of this project just before Christmas. What I found is that thing works really well. You can have somebody at the other end of a basketball court, and it can pick up what that speaker has to say. And similarly, you can watch the screen and you ask people, you know, to indicate with a thumbs up or something if they've got a question, and you can pick up the people that have got a question and they can speak, and it comes from the smart board, and it's terrific. It really worked. We had questions coming from the smart screen. We had questions coming from the floor. I thought it worked very well. And just a quick kudos to Ron there for getting that done. So that, I think, was the plan. Alan, Sherry, do you want to expand on that at all?
I can just add, yeah, so we have sort of a, we would generally have an open house format. So we would have sort of presentation boards around the room, which we can also share online. Depending on what COVID restrictions are right now, we're supposed to stay seated. So we're not supposed to have that mingling. So for instance, Alan and I have some presentations this coming week that we're supposed to be open house format that we aren't now using the poster boards. But so some of that we will have to roll with at the time. But we were intending to have sort of that informal period where you can review the poster boards, chat with some of your neighbors, as well as sort of a more formal presentation. So we will still have that presentation format as well. One of the ways that in general, when we're using both an online as well as an in-person format, sometimes we have a moderator who can monitor the chat as well. So some of the questions that people put forward in the chat, if they aren't able to hear or don't want to speak out, they can provide those online in the chat function, and those get passed on to us to answer who are in the room.
Hold on, Mylene.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to do.
Am I holding on for Miley?
Carry on, Sherry.
Okay.
Sorry about.
That's okay. So I am meeting with Christy this week to talk about logistics. So some of it is just, again, when you having to do it online as well as in person, is just sort of having the staff to make sure that they're monitoring both the chat line to make sure we're not missing anyone's questions, but still giving everyone the opportunity both in the room as well as on online to ask their questions, make sure that they have the ability to do everything that everyone in person can. We will also have a feedback form, which is, something that we would normally do when you have an in-person open house, but that form will also be available to people who attend online that they can fill in and either submit electronically or hard copies. So we're just trying to mirror everything that we would normally do at an open house in person and provide those opportunities online as well. Alan, did you have anything to add to that? But we will be working out details with, like I said, I'm meeting with Christy later this week to figure out exact details. But
No, I think that captures it nicely, Sherry. I think it's a matter of a presentation and lots of opportunity for questions and observations to come forward from folks as well, and then some kind of ability to provide input online or what have you as well. Through a separate kind of comments online form would be helpful.
And regular reminders throughout that everybody's welcome to any meeting, but when we're on a particular day, the focus of your examples is going to be focused on a particular sub-community. Okay, any other questions? No, not seeing any. Okay, Alan or Sherry, do you have anything further to add? Because our next item is question period from non-committee members.
Looks like David has a question there.
Oh,
Sorry, it's less a question and more. Eleanor raised the comment of how to get input from community members and how to include people and how to explain to different groups. And I don't think that was addressed yet.
Okay, I wasn't sure if we can have a chat about that now.
Sorry, I did. Sorry, Matt, I didn't mean to step.
Yeah, no, that's good. I wasn't sure if we needed that talk now or just as time goes on, but sure. What's the best way of reaching out to all different segments of the population to get them to come out to these meetings?
Matt, it's Bob. One of the vehicles that we've got in our community is community partners, and it's made up of representatives from most of the community groups. And we could certainly put the pitch to them and in turn ask them to get back to their own memberships.
Okay. I think also reminding our sub-communities who all have Facebook pages that we need them to I was going to say retweet, but reference these dates onto their local Facebook pages. You can tell that I'm really good at this. I do it all the time. Yeah. Haven't got a clue what the hell I'm talking about.
I think it's a great idea, Matt. Yeah, redistributing the communication is brilliant, and I think that's what I was trying to say, if not you.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments on open houses? You'll see this coming out in SCAHA Matters. We'll make a concerted effort to get it refaced on multiple Facebook pages. Just do whatever you can to get people to come. Yes, Mylene. Go ahead, Mylene.
I know in years past, when there's been community things going on, there's been bulletin boards around the community, especially in different neighborhoods. I know that Heritage Hills Vintage Views has a community board. as do some of the mobile home parks, some of the shops, retail outlets in town in Okanagan Falls also have some bulletin boards. Just wondering if perhaps a poster of some sort could be made and put up around some of those locations.
Yep, good idea. Single page poster and flagging all the dates and the times, etc. And a reminder to go to RDOS Connections for more information.
I'd be willing to make the poster and just provide a file that can go for each of those neighborhood meetings. I guess there would be 5 different posters with specific information for those different communities, sub-communities, I guess.
Do we really need 5 different posters? Or can we have one poster with all the dates?
Yeah, I guess maybe one that states all 5 dates and which which communities it's going to be focused on.
Yeah.
So one with all 5 dates and the focus is on those specific communities on those said dates.
Okay, and that would be an abbreviated version of the ad that's going to be in Skaha Matters, essentially.
I guess so, something
Yeah.
like that, but something that would stand out with less information, but really say the date and time.
I'm seeing some heads nod. Okay, sounds like a plan.
Okay, I'll do that and I'll pass that along.
Yep, thank you. Sherry seems to be the nexus for all of this stuff. Okay, anything else relative to these open houses? Okay. Our next part of the agenda, then moving on. I just want to make sure, Sherry and Alan, have you got everything you needed to get done tonight? Done. Okay, heads nodding.
I think we're good, Matt. Thank you very much.
Okay. I'll go first to the general community and then we'll come to Ron. So I've got one, Nita Joss from Upper Carmi. I don't want to put you on the spot, Nita. But if you had a question for us and you can find your unmute button, now's the time. Not that we're putting you on the spot or anything. And is it Sony or Sunny? Or Judy Garner?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Judy. Go
I
ahead.
thought it was an excellent meeting tonight. Thank you to everybody, and I thought the questions asked were great. My question is just a quick admin question. Will the 4-page memo that's going into the mailboxes, will it also be available electronically for those people who are traveling right now?
Okay, Sherry?
Yes, it will be posted on the regional RDOS Regional Connections website.
Okay, that's perfect.
Okay, any other questions from anybody? Or Jim, for that matter?
I'm good.
Thanks for being here, Jim. Actually, just a shout out to our Chief Financial Officer from RDOS taking the time to join us here. Thank you, Jim. Okay, Ron, floor is yours for 10 minutes if you'd like.
Thank you very much, Matt, and I'm going to try to do it in less than 2 or 1. I just want to say a very big thank you to everybody, echoing the thank you to Jim Zaffino. It's real appreciated all that you do, and Christy in support of this process, and same to David Van Omen. Thank you so much. But the biggest thank you of all to the consultants. I've just been so impressed by your good work, the way you've handled questions, the way you've provided information. I've learned a lot. I feel like I'm auditing a university course that I've taken before, but I just am really impressed by the good work and how hard this is to communicate so much, and how you've handled it. I'm hoping the committee members have all receive benefit. And I just want to encourage all of them in the future. If you have questions, just bring them to the future meetings, because each of you has got a real important role to play. And I really appreciate every one of you. And I can tell from the questions we're hearing. I mean, we heard Judy comment a moment ago how good they are. I think we're really making a lot of progress. I know Alan suggested that we'd start to feel that after Christmas. And I can tell you, I felt it before Christmas. And I just want to say a big thank you. Those are all my remarks. Thanks.
Okay. All right. It is 7:35. We've got half an hour. I'm not in any way encouraging us to use it, because I know that we've gone over time previously. But if anybody has anything that they want to get off their chest, got a minute or two now, if you've got anything you need to say. I'm not seeing anybody. All right. Well, I'm going to wish everybody a happy new year. I hope we're through this next wave of Omicron quickly. And I, hope your families stay healthy and safe. And I look forward to our next meeting, and shortly afterwards, our open houses, because things are going to get kind of exciting there. Okay. All right. So thank you all very much. Happy New Year.